Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for our discussion today. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that I just recently read Ben Shapiro's new book, The Authoritarian Moment. Actually listened to it on audiobook, but went through that book and totally understand what he's trying to talk about. I've talked about many of the topics that he covered in the book, but it was a good, concise summary of what we're seeing taking place in the world today, especially post-COVID, during the worldwide epidemic, COVID-19. We're seeing governments seizing power, taking control, trying to micromanage everything, trying a power grab and take as much power as they can in order to rein in all elements of society so that they can sit back and basically be puppet masters for the population. Now that sounds overblown and inflated and hyperbolic. I know that sounds crazy, but that's exactly what the trend is in our modern world today. We have to come to grips with it. We have to realize it, that is what's taking place today. We have people, the elites and the wealthier class and the political class, the experts, the academics, all of these institutions of power, they really believe that the world cannot be trusted to govern itself. Self-government cannot be trusted to run this world. Citizens cannot be given the power to control their own destiny, to decide and make decisions in their life. Government must be there to guide and direct them, and if necessary, coerce them into the right way. And so we're seeing a wave of totalitarianism sweeping across our land. We've seen it in the last presidential election here in the United States. The last administration, the Trump administration, believed in more of a traditional United States, democratic, capitalist, hands-off, give the people the basic rules and then let them live their life, get out of their life, don't interfere with them, let them make decisions, and then use the principle of subsidiarity. The lower the decision can be made, the better. You don't need to have these top-down from government, Washington, to the individuals controlling everything. Give the people a basic framework, and they will go about their business, go about their lives, make the decisions, enforce the rules that are very important, but don't multiply rule after rule after rule. Don't try to micromanage the economy. Don't try to micromanage people's lives. Don't become a nanny state, which has been the trend in Europe, which is the vision of communism. Communism in China, for example, the biggest example of communism in our world today, that is a totalitarian, massive bureaucracy that seeks to control every single citizen. They want every single citizen to have a smartphone, that smartphone will be their identification badge. They must show that to enter buses, to travel, to make purchases. They can control everything about the economy. They can control every move. Actually, the surveillance society over there, they have millions of cameras placed everywhere in China that they can monitor the activity of every single citizen through high-speed computers and databases, and then they can look up and see where someone's been and what they're doing and what they're spending their time with. It's almost like that dystopian novel 1984 of George Orwell's, where that totalitarian state, Big Brother was the nickname of the government, could spy on every person and know exactly what they're doing, and then by doing that, they could control every person and make them do what the state wants them to do. Well, we're seeing a rise in totalitarianism, and that's what Ben Shapiro's new book, The Totalitarian Moment, is all about. He's outlining and showing how there is this move by the cultural elites, those in power, to seize power, seize more power, and shape society into their vision. And the way that's going to happen is that they can control and censor people who don't go along with what they're saying. And we're going to see that more and more into the future, unless there's some kind of massive revolt that takes place or some kind of revolution against it. But it seems that a lot of people are content to go along with this totalitarian movement as long as they can still have the basic features of life that they like. For example, as long as they can still have the internet and still have Facebook and still watch Netflix, and they can still eat where they want to eat. And this is what's happening in China. A lot of the younger generation, they just totally accept the totalitarian power grab that the state Chinese government is doing over there because, well, it meets their basic needs, and they don't have to worry about a lot of things. They don't have to be responsible because the state has said this, and all they have to do is just listen to what the state says, and they're in good graces with the state, and then they get rewarded, and they can travel, and they can buy things, electronics, computers, and all kinds of fun things, and they can do what they want, not realizing that they're in a velvet cage. They are being chained, velvet chains, so they can't feel the harsh steel against their bones yet. But the totalitarians are taking over, and in the end, it will mean slavery. So as Christians, we have to figure out, okay, what is our response to this totalitarian power grab that we're seeing here in the United States under the Biden administration, the leftist liberals? What are we going to do when they start trying to regulate our church? We've already seen an unprecedented amount of church regulation by the state. You know, there's this church-state issue, and we have in our Constitution certain rights, the freedom of religion and so forth. Well, during this pandemic, this epidemic, COVID-19, we saw the state try to, and in most cases were successful in regulating church. They told the church how many people could be in the building. They told the church when they could meet and when they couldn't meet. They tried to tell the church, you can't sing these songs. You can't sing songs. That spreads the virus. You can't stand up and say hallelujah. That spreads the virus. You have to be 6 feet apart from everyone in your church. You have to wear a mask during the whole worship service. Or then they say, well, you can take your mask off once you're seated. And you can do this, you can do that. There was so much micromanaging taking place, especially in the year 2020, that we've never seen any kind of regulations like that. We have never seen any totalitarian control of religion and Christianity like we saw last year. And so this is not going away. This is not something that the state is going to just give up and say, okay, well, we did that just for that temporary little time. No, it wasn't a little time. It was almost the entire year. And then there are still churches that are still locked out and they can't meet. And up in Canada, it's even worse. There were pastors who were actually arrested for having a church service. They were hauled into prison. They were arrested in their cars. When they left the church, the police followed them and on the highway pulled their car over right in the middle of the highway and arrested them with 5 or 6 police cars with their lights flashing. And the pastor of a church was arrested and thrown in jail for holding a church service that was not, quote, authorized by the Canadian government. And the Canadian Mounted Police actually arrested these pastors and then threw them in the prison. So it was even worse in Canada, but it got bad in the United States to the point where churches were not meeting for months and months and months. And it all was under the cover of COVID-19. All of this totalitarian power grab was done and is being done right now still by the governments under the guise of safety, COVID-19 restrictions, COVID-19 health concerns. Everything has a pretext. All of these power grabs. And will it end after everyone is vaccinated? Oh, no. Then there's going to be a variant to the COVID-19. So we have to lock down again, just like they're doing now in New Zealand. One case of COVID in New Zealand, and the whole country has to lock down. You have to shelter in place because someone somewhere in New Zealand got COVID-19 even after they were vaccinated. In the same way now in Australia, they're starting to do the same restrictions as before, as the year before, because there are a few more cases of COVID, not more deaths, but cases, and even after the vaccine. So we are going into a new phase here of totalitarianism. And it's not the old style where, for example, Lenin came in with the Bolsheviks and took over Russia just through force and just conquered through revolutionary violence. No, that was the old style. The new style totalitarianism comes through a series of crises. There's a pandemic. There's global warming. See, the elites feel that the masses don't take these crises seriously enough, and they don't take seriously the need for totalitarian control. The elites feel that the assumption of these global elites is that the world is too complex the way it is now. It needs ultra-regulated. It needs micromanaged. And so we need to set up a committee or council of wise people to micromanage the world, or else the world will self-destruct or will go extinct, or some life-ending catastrophe will happen to us. And so we need top-down government heavy control in order to save the planet. And so they're just looking for excuses to take control. And panic of 2020, the COVID-19 epidemic, was a gift to them because it allowed the governments of the world, under the safety protocols and safety regulations, to grab power. And we saw people like in Michigan, Governor Whitmer, just take full advantage of these emergency powers and try to control all aspects of life in her state of Michigan. We saw it happen in New York. We saw it happen, and it's still happening out in California right now, where these political opportunists grab power under emergency measures because of COVID-19 health concerns, and they shut down churches, they highly regulate businesses, they take away basic human rights. Basically, the Constitution is suspended. It didn't get so far as martial law, but that's only the last and final step. But they didn't need to go with martial law. We had enough people saying, okay, we'll go along with this. But the question is, as Christians, how far do we go in regulation of our Christian faith? Will we accept more government lockdowns of churches? Will we, again, ever let the government of the United States or state or local governments tell us we can't go to church? Now, I think most churches and most pastors and most congregations, when this COVID-19 virus hit early in 2020, January, February, they didn't know what it was. They wanted to make sure, err on the side of safety. So we go along with these government mandated lockdowns, and then hoping that, 30 days, 60 days to flatten the curve, 90 days to flatten the curve. Okay, once that's done, boom, we'll get back to church. Well, for a lot of churches, it didn't resume until a year later. Church didn't resume. You look at some of these big mega churches, they didn't start up until after a whole year of lockdown. So they followed all the little guidelines that they were told by their state and local authorities, and they wouldn't even have church. Question is, do Christians ever want to do that again? Do Christians ever want to cede power and authority to these petty local tyrant politicians and just let them run roughshod over our constitutional rights? I don't think we ever want to do that again. I think we want to have a situation where we have information given to us and we make decisions based on the information. And if we feel as a church that we can hold services safely, then we go ahead and have services. If we don't feel we can organize or manage the safe environment, we on our own, because we don't want to make people sick, we on our own say, look, we're going to take a pause in our worship services for a few months until we get a total handle on whatever the emergency is. But I'm afraid that the totalitarians aren't going to accept that. When is the next lockdown emergency post-COVID going to happen? Is it going to be a climate change emergency? Because we've been hearing from a lot of activists, and the newspapers and the news media trumpet these messages. We've been hearing that if we don't do something about climate change, the world will be destroyed in 11 years or 12 years or 10 years or so. Well, are they going to come at us now with a new crisis? Are they going to come at us with the climate change crisis and say, our calculations say that unless we reduced carbon emissions by 50%, our world will die in the next 5 years. And so governments of the world just come heavy-handed at people and say, we have to interrupt our economy, we have to stall or actually destroy our economies in order to save the planet. And so we need people to make sacrifices, and on and on. They raise our taxes, they restrict travel, they restrict church services. They do whatever they want to do because we let them do it during a time of lesser crisis. But see, it's very difficult at this time to actually gauge what is a crisis and what is not a crisis, because we have been told for over a year and a half now that every day there's a new crisis. And we've been told by experts to do this, and then they contradicted themselves and told us to do that. And so we have been fed contradictory information to the point where a lot of people are just saying, we don't know who to believe and we don't know what to believe because we've been lied to so often. We've been deceived. The propaganda has been so heavy for a year and a half that we don't know what to do. Now, a lot of people who are more safety oriented, they're just going to say, well, we just have to believe everything the government says because we can't believe the media, we can't believe experts, we can't believe this, that, and the other. We're going to have to just trust our nanny state government to do the right thing. And so a lot of people are just going to go along with the totalitarian power grab. They're just going to cede power over to the political authorities and say, okay, we're just going to hand it over to you. Everything's so complicated. Another thing that people have been feeling is that the issues are so complex and so hard to understand and so technical that we just have to cede the entire decision-making process to the experts. And that's what the next crisis is probably going to be. It's probably going to be a climate induced crisis. There is going to be a climate panic. The elites have found that the best way to bring about social change is to manufacture a crisis or to use a crisis and then blow it out of proportion and hype it and get it to the point where people are so scared they don't want to do anything. So the only thing left to do is just to listen to their big nanny state government. We saw this with COVID-19. We saw people basically giving over their life decision-making ability to the state, to the CDC, to Dr. Fauci, and to all these so-called voices of authority who are constantly changing their minds and contradicting themselves and giving no stability to their messages. And now we have a new administration, the Biden administration, running up record deficits, spending money like we've never seen before, deficit spending, massive government social programs. This is exactly what the elite, global elite, wants. And as Christians, we are going to have to come to terms with this. And we're going to have to sift and sort through this and try to figure out how to react to it. We know that we have the right under God to worship, and that is an inviolable right. You cannot take that right away. So we're not going to follow all of the petty political so-called health regulations. We're not going to follow all of these things that violate the constitutional rights. If you can come in and violate the constitutional rights over every so-called crisis, then you don't have a constitutional right. It's just more of a guideline, or it's more of an ideal. No, these are rights. And so we should never, ever let government on any level, whether it's state, local, or federal, we should never, ever let them tell us when we can meet and when we can't meet, how we can have our church services, and how we should conduct them. No, never again should we put up with that kind of micromanaging, controlling manipulation. That is totalitarianism. That's what you see in communist China right now. And that's what we don't ever want to see in a free nation such as the United States. But we're going to have a lot more issues than just meeting church on Sunday. We're going to have all kinds of issues as far as free speech. You probably, if you followed my program, you realize that a few months ago, I actually had some videos taken down from the internet. And why were they taken down? Because I talked about topics that are forbidden on the internet. YouTube actually took down a couple videos that I had that were in no way controversial, in no way violated any terms of service, in no way were inappropriate. They were simply videos that didn't line up with what YouTube felt was real news. And so they labeled it misinformation and took it down. And of course, I appealed. I said, look, there isn't anything in here that I said that violates the terms of service. I'm not pushing any misinformation. And promptly got back the reply, no, your video is still down. We reject your appeal. There was no fair inquiry. It's just, we're censoring you. Your views don't match our views, and so you're gone. You're out. And that could happen at any time. And so any situation on the internet, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any platform on the internet now can be censored. Christian views can be censored if they are deemed dangerous to the political elite, if they're deemed dangerous to the state, if they're deemed dangerous to the new totalitarians. And this can happen not just on the internet. This can happen in corporations. This can happen in companies. You can be fired for your views as Christians. You can believe and hold the Christian conviction that marriage is between a man and a woman alone. That's the only definition of marriage. And if you state that, you can be fired. You can be dismissed if you work for a government entity, if you work for a state or local government or even the federal government in any position, a federal position or state or local government. You can be fired for not agreeing with the totalitarian party line. And so as Christians, we have to think about these things. We have to say, okay, how much am I willing to suffer for my faith? Am I willing to lose my job for my faith? And as a sincere Christian, we should all say, yes, I'm willing to lose my job, my livelihood, my income. And that requires faith. That requires that God will take care of us when we live for Him and when we trust in Him. So we have to trust in God and not worry about the consequences. Yeah, there will be negative consequences for living out the Christian faith, but we haven't had to experience those consequences for a long, long time in this country. We have had a nice, cushy, soft, Judeo-Christian worldview heritage that we inherited from our forefathers and the people that came over from England and Europe. And that was a more or less semi-Christian worldview. And as Christians and as people that go to church and pastors and church leaders, we've enjoyed the privilege of being able to function in a semi-Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview for centuries here. But that is coming to an end, and I can see it ending very, very quickly, because now a lot of times if you talk in terms of traditional biblical Christian marriage, you are labeled a hate speech person. You are putting hate speech. If you simply preach a sermon on Christian morality, you can have your sermon taken down from the internet platforms. You can be banned from the internet for teaching Christianity because it goes against the party line of the totalitarians. This is getting to the point where as Christians we have to really count the cost. How much is our Christian faith to us? How much is it worth to us? Are we willing to lose everything for our Christian faith? Or will we compromise our Christian faith and go along with the totalitarians and say, okay, well, whatever you want. If you don't want me to preach that, I won't preach that. I cannot do that. I hope you cannot do that. If there's ever comes a day where internet platforms will not let me teach what the Bible teaches in any subject, on any topic, if they will not let me teach that, I will leave the internet. I will throw out my computer. I will get rid of everything that I use to produce videos, and I will go back to the old days of preaching only in person and one-to-one, rather than deny the truth of God. And I think you need to take that stand too. You need to say, look, the early church had to face this when Caesar said, you can worship any God you want, you can worship Jesus, but you just have to burn incense to Caesar as a show of devotion to him. And the Christian said, no, I can't. Now, what would that mean? Well, maybe that would mean death. Maybe that would mean imprisonment. Maybe you would lose all your property. You'd pay a price for that. We are getting to the point where we may have to pay a price for our faith. Are you willing to pay the price for your faith? That's a big question you have to begin to think about, because it's becoming a reality. You will be faced with that probably in the near future, and you have to have an answer already before that day comes. So these are very serious issues, very somber times we live in. Be ready for that choice. Hope that's been helpful to you. We'll see you back next week on the program. God bless.